Okay, so during this time of the year, it's a time of very obvious mourning, and we mourn for the loss of the Beis Hamikdash, but at the same point in time, we also mourn for the millions and millions of Jews that unfortunately were brutally murdered during the time period of the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash and throughout the generations. The story of the 10 martyrs, the Asarah, Harugay, Malchut, this story begins at the end of the second Beis Hamikdash, at the end of the second temple. During this time period, prophecy began to move away from the prophets. The sort of the feeling of the presence of God began to wane, and while there was Ruach HaKodesh, this phenomenon of divine the divine intuition of knowing things also that are not visible to the eye, or knowing things a little bit in the future, was still around. An example that is actually related to our discussion is from something from Shmuel HaKatan. So Shmuel HaKatan, he got his name because he was almost as pious and almost as prophetic as Shmuel Hanavi, Shmuel the prophet. And that's why it compares him to Shmuel the prophet, and he was a Katan, he was small in that comparison. He lived during the time of Rabbi Gamliel Hazakin, and this is still while the Beis Hamikdash, while the temple stood. In the time of the temple, the place of Sanhedrin, of the courts, the gathering was in Jerusalem, in Yerushalayim. But there was also something called Yavne. Yavne was a coastal town that was near Ashdod, and this was a gathering place for the great sages. And if anybody knows history, we know the Karen Yavne, the sages of Yavne, were saved after the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash. Yavne comes up quite a lot. So this was a small town near Ashdod. There was, at one particular meeting that took place at Yavne, that Shmuel HaKatan, he prophesied that there was going to be upcoming murders of 10 martyrs by the hands of the Romans. And what's even more significant was he had a prediction of the decrees that Hadrian, the Roman emperor, would forbade in teaching Torah and other issues against the Jewish nation. And the 10 martyrs, that started with the murdered Tanoic sages, started off with Rabbi Shmuel Kohen Gadol and Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel. It started with that and ended with Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Hanana ben Tarjan. We're not going to be able to go to the end, but we'll start off with at least the first. Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel and the Rabbi Shmuel Kohen Gadol, when they heard this prophecy from Shmuel HaKatan, they decided they wanted to journey out and to let the people know. The Roman occupiers in the land of Israel during that time, they heard this, they saw this, and they saw this as an act of treason. So these two rabbis were arrested at the end of their journey, and then they were eventually killed by the Romans. So, just to give a little bit of an overview this is just like an introduction, and we're going to give an overview, and then we'll begin with the story. A bulk of the information that we're going to be discussing tonight comes from a medrash called Eila Eskara. Eila Eskara, literally the translation means, "For these I will remember." This is a medrash that describes the murder of the 10 martyrs in the hands of the Romans. The medrash does look for some purpose, reason for the suffering of the people, especially these 10 righteous people, 10 Gedolei Adar, 10 leaders of the generation. And in there, it does find 3 sins that the rabbis were deemed responsible, and hence the cause of their death. So the first one was that there were those amongst the Jewish people that unfortunately, after the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash, the temple, they did not mourn the destruction. Because they said, what did we really lose? We still have wise scholars, we still have these great rabbis that they could guide the world with, through God's Torah and mitzvos. So the reason number one, it was not proper mourning that was done for the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash. Number two, the rabbis themselves were held accountable because they taught Torah to the Caesar, and we'll soon see the how that played out. And the third reason was something that's very Kabbalistic that I would like to get to to, I don't know if we'll get to it in this class, but once we continue the series, we'll be able to get a little bit more in detail in it. But the rabbis were a reincarnation of the 10 tribes that were involved, the Asarah Shvatim, the 10 tribes that were involved in the sin of selling Yosef. So each one, and we'll break it down once we get up to it, but each one came back as a reincarnation, and each one is tied to a certain shevet, a certain tribe, and they're coming as a kapara, as an atonement for the sin of selling Yosef. Now, the leaders of the Jewish nation, as is not only during the time of the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash, but in general, are held responsible for that generation, and they're held responsible for the sins of that generation. And they should have shown the loss of the Beis Hamikdash, again, to their level, and I'm only repeating the information that I learned. This is no one to say that, it was their fault. They were huge, that they were in reincarnation of the Asarah Shvatim, but to understand that on their level, they should have shown the people the loss of the Beis Hamikdash. Now, even though Judaism, has adapted, has survived, even, almost 2,000 years through since the loss of the Beis Hamikdash, the rabbi himself, the irony was because the rabbis were so great, the more difficult it was for the common people to mourn the destruction, because they said, look at how much of great rabbis we had, right? Because the Beis Hamikdash was a connection between the Jewish people and God. It was a place where the heaven and earth connected. But the Jewish people said, but we have these great scholars that we can connect us also to anything godly, anything that we need. So the irony is that because they were so great, the people thought, okay, what's the big deal that we lost the Beis Hamikdash? But that in itself was the reason why God had to remove the great rabbis due to their greatness and what people thought that they didn't lose anything by the Beis Hamikdash. There's a lot to speak about this, and maybe we'll speak about it at a future time. But going back to our story, God went and put in the mind of the Caesar to study Torah. And he went over to the sages and he said, teach me the Torah. And they began teaching him. They taught him from Bereshis, and they went all the way to Parshas Mishpatim. And the Medrash tells us that if they didn't teach the Caesar the story of Yosef and his brothers, the Caesar would have never thought of killing them, because he heard this story and that put into his mind, wait a minute, they were never punished. So he took it on his responsibility as sort of God's messenger, that he's going to take it into his own hands and he is going to go and punish the Jewish people for that. And the Romans had this tradition for many decades that a rabbi has to be killed and to atone for the sin of Yosef and his brothers. Now, this is a little bit difficult to understand, because we know that parents don't get punished on their children's sin, and children don't get punished on the parents. Everybody's responsible for their own sin. So the Meshech Chochmah explains this and says that every generation pays a small part from the punishment from the sin of the golden calf. And the Meshech Chochmah goes and cites another medrash, a medrash in Mishlei, that besides every generation has a small part in the punishment of the sin of the golden calf, every generation is responsible and takes part of the sin of the selling of Yosef. So these two sins, the golden calf and the selling of Yosef, explains the Meshech Chochmah, is the cause of all the suffering that still exists. And this, the entire Yom Kippur service in the Beis Hamikdash was primarily, its purpose was to effect atonement for these two sins. These were two huge sins that we've been trying to effect atonement and erase it. Whenever a Jew sins between man and God, there's two types of interactions: either sins between you and God, or between you and a friend. So whenever a person sins between man and God, they're punished also for the sin of worshiping the golden calf. And whenever a Jew sins between a man and his fellow, they're also punished for the sin of selling Yosef, because again, that trickles down to every generation. Now we know the first temple, the first Beis Hamikdash, was destroyed because of three things: Avodah Zarah, idolatry; immorality, Gilui Arayos; and Shvichas Damim, which is murder. The second temple, the second Beis Hamikdash, was destroyed for a single type of sin, and that is sinas chinam, which is baseless or causeless hatred. Now, explains the Meshech Chochmah, so the appropriate time for God to also punish for the sins of Yosef and his brothers would be, very appropriately, in the destruction of the second temple, because that was a sin between man and his friend, and this was the sin also of Yosef, between man and his friend, between him and his brothers. So now, the continuation of that sin was also an effect from Yosef all the way to in the generation of the destruction of the second temple. The Yosef and his brothers, they failed their test in loving one another. The rabbis in that generation, to their level, they failed to instill love for one another in the hearts of the people. We know that Rabbi Akiva famously taught, you have to love your friend, your neighbor, as like yourself. And this is the most important verse in the Torah, but his own students unfortunately failed to internalize this message, and we know that the mourning stage between Pesach and Shavuos, we mourn the deaths of the 24,000 students of Rabbi Akiva, that they lost this aspect. They lost the aspect of the honoring and respecting the friend. The Arizal goes, and this is something that we'll discuss when we get to this. It's written down in Sefer Echalos, that there was a connection between each. Besides the fact that this was also part of the sin, but there was a connection in the reincarnation, in the Gilgulim, between each Shevet, each tribe that was involved in the sale of Yosef, to each of the 10 martyrs. Reuven, Binyamin, and Yosef, there's different reasoning behind that. Just to give you a little bit, because Reuven wasn't involved in the sin. He was, he wasn't around, but he did get some sort of punishment. And we'll speak about that in Meretz Hashem when we get to that. Binyamin was not part of the sale, so that takes away, one. Reuven takes away the other one, so that's why you left 10 out of the 12 tribes were responsible for it. Yosef was held responsible for the sin of the sale, because he himself was part of the cause that his brothers went and sold him. But to each and that, we'll get more clarity once we speak about each particular tribe. The Medrash, Eila Eskra, is also the basis of what we pray in Musaf on Yom Kippur. And Tisha B'Av, there is a kinah called Arzeh Halavanan, which also speaks about the loss of the 10 martyrs of during the time of the second Beis HaMikdash. So, when we look at the number 10 is not just, out of the blue number 10. Number 10 is a number of a totality. It represents a completion. And this is like sort of it encompasses all the details. There is, for example, there's 10 utterance of creation. The world was created with 10 sayings. 10 times HaKadosh Baruch Hu, God said, Vayomer, and the world was created. There's 10 spheros, which is more on the Kabbalistic side of things. There was 10 martyrs. There were 10 commandments. 10 represents an all-encompassing number. So when we're dealing with the 10 martyrs, it also represents all individuals that were persecuted and executed by the Romans. Now, the Roman Emperor Hadrian was a very brutal emperor. He killed hundreds of thousands of Jews during the Bar Kokhba revolts. He also went, and after the war, he continued killing millions and millions of Jews. Hadrian actually tried to root out Judaism, and he prohibited to learn Torah, the Hebrew calendar. He executed scholars. The Torah scroll was burned on Harugay, on Temple Mount. So he did many things to try to erase Judaism from the map. The problem is that, going back to the reason of the destruction, is the whole idea was that of the 10 martyrs was the people didn't really feel the loss of the Beis HaMikdash, and right during that time is when HaKadosh Baruch Hu put in the mind of the Caesar to go and start learning. So when he reached the verse in Parshas Mishpatim, it says someone who kidnaps a man and sells him, he went and he ordered that his palace should immediately be filled up with shoes. Now, the reason that he filled it up with shoes is that he was going to call 10 scholars to his palace to start speaking about the story of Yosef and the punishment that he's going to dish out because of that. And he filled his palace with shoes because he wanted the scholars that were coming, the rabbis that would come, to recognize that Yosef was sold for a pair of shoes, the value of a pair of shoes. Now you could ask, how could someone like Yosef be sold for a pair of shoes, 20 silver pieces? How is that possible? So the brothers, when they threw him in the pit, they removed his clothes and they threw him in the pit. Now, the Torah tells us that the pit was empty. But when the pit was empty means that there was no water in it, but there was snakes and scorpions inside of this. So Yosef saw this. So he grew in a very, very sad state. He's like, what am I going to be? Out of the fear and terror, he lost all his beauty and his value. But even though there was snakes and scorpions, God went and he closed the mouths of these creatures that they didn't harm him. And when Yosef's brothers saw a caravan of the Yishmaelim, of the Arabs that were coming, so they drew him out of the pit and they sold him. But during that time, God was saying, wait a minute, should a righteous person like Yosef stand unclothed in front of people? So during that time, he had this amulet that was hanging around his neck. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu, God sent the angel Gabriel, and he fashioned, from the amulet, he fashioned a garment, and he clothed Yosef. Now, Yosef's brothers, they put him in the pit without clothing, and now he's coming out with clothing. So when they were selling him to the Ishmaelim, he says, wait a minute, he says, we didn't sell him with the clothing, give us back his clothing. But the Ishmaelim replied, no, we're not going to return to you unless you give us another 4 pair of shoes. So he ended up going to Egypt with this pair of clothing that the Malach Gabriel, the angel Gabriel, went and formed it from that amulet. And in this clothing, this was the same clothing that he was thrown into jail. This is the same clothing that was brought before Paro. This was the same clothing that he wore when he was ruling over Egypt. Now, this is the background of what was going on when the Caesar asked to put shoes inside the palace. Now, the Caesar now calls 10 sages to his palace, and he seated them in golden chairs. And he goes over to them and he says, I have a very deep and difficult question to ask you. And I want you to only answer me truthfully and strictly according to the correct interpretation of halacha of the law. And they agreed. And the Caesar proceeds to ask them, what is the law for someone who kidnaps his Jewish brother and cruelly sells him? So the sages answer, the law is that he should be put to death. So the Caesar responds to them, says, if that's the case, you're all deserving of death. They're like, what are you talking about? Why? So he responds, for the sale of Yosef. If the brothers, the Caesar responded, were alive today, I would judge them and I would dish out my punishment to them, but they're no longer alive. So they're your ancestors. So now you're going to bear the guilt of your ancestors. So the rabbis responded to the Caesar, do us a favor, give us 3 days. And this time we'll try to figure out some sort of legal defense to save ourselves. And if you cannot, we accept the Caesar's judgment. And he agreed to this. So the sages left, and they turned to Rabbi Shmuel Kohen Gadol. And they asked him, there's ways, pi Kabbalah, through Kabbalistic ways, of, even though there's 2 worlds, right? There's this world and there's the next world, right? The heavenly world. There is ways through meditation and particular Kabbalistic, meditations of God's name that you're able to sort of travel from this world to the next world and inquire and poke around to get some information. So when the sages left, they turned over to Rabbi Shmuel Kohen Gadol. And they said, do us a favor, meditate on this explicit name of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, go up to Shemayim, go up to heaven, and find out if this decree was from God. So Rabbi Shmuel purified himself. He went to the mikvah. He wrapped himself up in his talis and tefillin. He said the explicit name of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and he went up to Shemayim, he went up to heaven. There, he encounters the angel Gabriel. And Gabriel goes over to him and he says, are you Yishmael that God praises every day that I have a servant on earth whose face is similar to mine? Rabbi Shmuel says, yes, I am. So Gabriel asked him, why did you come up here? What are you doing here? So Rabbi Shmuel responded, the wicked king has decreed against us to destroy 10 sages, 10 rabbis of Klal Yisrael, of Israel. And I came up here to figure out if this was a decree that came from God. So Gabriel looked at him and responded. He says, if the decree was not sealed by God, would you be able to annul it? Like, what is it that you're coming up with? Can you even do anything about it? So Rabbi Shmuel answered, yes, I could annul it. So the angel Gabriel asked him, how are you able to do that? So Rabbi Shmuel says, with the name of God, I'm able to annul it. I'm able to save ourselves. Basically what Rabbi Shmuel Kohen Gadol was telling him, he says, if I'm able to go and save myself and my colleagues from getting killed. So the angel Gabriel responded, and he said, "How fortunate are you, the children of Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, to whom God has revealed secrets that he doesn't even reveal to the angels." The angel Gabriel didn't even know about this, and this Rabbi Shmuel was aware of. Now, Rabbi Shmuel was an extremely beautiful person, and in fact, the Medrash tells us that he was part of the 7 most beautiful people that ever existed. The 7 beautiful people are Adam Arishon, the first man ever created, Yaakov Avinu, Yosef is number 3, Shaul is number 4, number 5 is Avshalom, number 6 is Rabbi Avo, and number 7 is this Rabbi Shmuel that we're talking about right now. Now, when they brought Rabbi Shmuel to Rome, all the women saw him and they were affected by his physical beauty. When they brought him before the king, he asked them, he says, the king asked him, "Are there other people in your nation as beautiful as you or more beautiful than you?" And he responded that there are not. And then the king went, the Caesar went and decreed death upon him. But to get an understanding where and how his beauty came from, when Rabbi Yossi, which was his father, was past the middle age of his life, and his wife asked him, he says, "My master, my husband, why do I see that many people have children and we don't have any children, not a son or a daughter?" So Rabbi Yossi responded, "The cause of our childlessness is that other wives are careful that when they leave the mikvah, if they come across something inappropriate, they go back and immerse themselves in the mikvah again. That's why they were able to have children." And the Raman Yeridel writes that a woman should be very careful when they leave the mikvah that a friend should meet them, so that the first thing that they see, they don't meet a non-kosher animal. And if they do meet one of those first, a God-fearing woman should go and immerse herself again. But anyways, his wife told him that if this is what is preventing us from having children, then I make an oath. She promised that if I will be careful about this from now on. And the next time she went to the mikvah, she came out and she came across a dog. So she went back to the mikvah. And then she came out and she came across a pig. So she went back into the mikvah. And this kept on happening over 80 times she went to the mikvah. Finally, God tells Angel Gabriel, none other than Angel Gabriel, says, "This righteous woman is suffering so much. Go and appear to her in the form of her husband and bring her to her house. This way that the first thing that she sees is not going to be anything impure." So the angel Gabriel set off in the form of Rabbi Yossi, her husband. He sat by the door of the mikvah, and then he escorted her home, and then he left. That night, she conceived and later gave birth to Rabbi Shmuel. This is why the angel Gabriel, when Rabbi Shmuel went up to heaven, to Shemayim, who was the one to greet him was none other than the angel Gabriel that came in before he was conceived. So now Gabriel, and this is also the region. It says that his form and face were similar to that of the angel Gabriel, and that's one of the reasons he was very, very beautiful. The angel Gabriel said to Yishmael, he said, "Yishmael, my son," it says, "by your life, this is what I heard behind the heavenly curtain, that 10 sages of Israel will be given to the wicked kingdom to be killed." So Rabbi Shmuel asked, "Why?" And he responded, "For the sale of Yosef and his brothers." And the angel continues, the Malach Gabriel continues, says, the Midas Hadin, the attribute of justice, comes every day before HaKadosh Baruch Hu, before God, and accuses, says, you didn't write even one extra letter in the Torah. But didn't the brothers sell Yosef? And they didn't get punished for that yet. So, therefore, it has been decreed, the angel says, that 10 sages of Israel will now be killed by the wicked kingdom. And Rabbi Shmuel asked him, he says, this has been like over 1,500 years ago. Could God not have found anyone until now? Why only until now? Why did he choose us? So, the angel Gabriel responded, "From the time of the sale of Yosef until today, God has never found 10 righteous people, holy people in a single generation who are worthy of the brothers. And therefore, God is giving the punishment to you." When Rabbi Shmuel heard this, he felt calmer. Rabbi Shmuel went and descended back to earth. And he told his colleagues that the decree has been made and it's already been signed and sealed. And he shared with them the encounter. They mourned and they rejoiced. They mourned because the decree has been made, but they rejoiced because God considered them to be righteous and holiness, the level of righteousness and holiness to that of Yosef and his brothers. And after they got this, you would think, what would they do after getting this news? They went and they continued learning. Even though they had some of them a few days left to live, they went and they sat and they studied the laws of Pesach, and they were, learning about things that are forbidden on Pesach, what is considered chametz, what's not considered chametz. And before they finished learning, the king came with his sword drawn, and he says, "What do you guys are learning now? How are your hearts free to learn Torah? Your ends are right near. Don't you know that there is a death sentence?" So the Caesar came, and the first two, unfortunately, that were killed was Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel and Rabbi Shmuel. So who do these, Rabbi Shmuel Kohen Gadol, who are these coming for which tribe? So Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel was a Nasi. He comes from a direct descendant from Shevet Yehuda. In fact, Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel's son was Rabbi Yehuda Nasi. So just to give you a little bit who authored the Mishnah. So Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel was a direct descendant from the Shevet, the tribe of Yehuda, and that's what he's coming to atone. And Rabbi Shmuel Kohen Gadol was a Kohen, which means that he comes from a direct descendant from the tribe, from the Shevet of Levi. So here the first two is the Shevet of Levi and the Shevet of Yehuda are coming to be atoned during with this unfortunately killing of these two rabbis. So the Caesar comes over to both of them and he says to them, who should be killed first? So Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel answered, he says, I'm the Nasi, I'm the prince, and the son of a prince, a descendant of King David, king of Israel. I should be killed first. And Rabbi Shmuel responded, but I'm the Kohen Gadol. I'm the son of a Kohen Gadol. I'm a descendant of Aaron HaKohen. I should be killed first, so I don't have to witness the death of my friend. So the Caesar responds, says, this one wants to be killed first, and this one wants to be killed first. So what we're going to do is we're going to draw the lots, and we're going to see which one should be killed first. And they drew lots, and the lot fell out on Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel that he would be killed first. So the Caesar commanded that he be beheaded first, and he was. And now Rabbi Shmuel Kohen Gadol took his head that was when he was beheaded, and he put it on his lap and he began to cry bitterly. And he said, this is the Torah, this is its reward, this is the tongue that used to explain the Torah in 70 languages, and now it's licking the dust. And he continued to mourn and cry for Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel. The Caesar asked him, says, what's this all about? Why are you crying of him so much? You should cry about yourself. You're going to be heading there very shortly. So Rabbi Shmuel answers, says, I'm not crying for myself because my friend was greater than me in Torah and wisdom. I'm crying because he preceded me in the heavenly yeshiva. And while he was speaking and mourning and crying, the Caesar's daughter peeked out the window, and she took a look at Rabbi Shmuel Kohen Gadol and his beauty, and her mercy was aroused, and she sent a message to her father. And she asked him, says, I have a single request from you, my dear father. And, I don't know if she said my dear father. She said, I have a single request from you. And the Caesar replied with a message that she could have anything except for Rabbi Shmuel and his friends. So she sent a message back. She said, spare the life of Rabbi Shmuel. So the Caesar responded that he has already taken an oath to kill him, and it's not going to happen. I'm not going to save him. So she replied back, if so, then peel his skin off his face so I could look at it instead of looking in a mirror. He was so beautiful that she wanted to always see his to see his face. So immediately the Caesar commanded that they start peeling off the skin from his face. When they reached the place of his tefillin, Rabbi Shmuel cried out a loud and bitter cry, and it shook the heavens and the earth. And then he cried a second time, and it shook even the Kisei HaKavod, the heavenly throne. And the angel said to God, it says, should a righteous person like this, who you have shown all the secrets in the upper worlds, the lower worlds, he should be killed in such a manner? And the angel said, Zu Torah v'zu schara, this is Torah and this is the reward. And God responded in a very, very interesting response. First of all, God said, leave him, it's a merit. He's going to have a merit that is going to extend for many generations, which is something that we can understand. But then God says that if I hear any more cries, I'm going to return the whole universe into emptiness, meaning I'm going to destroy the entire world. And now this is something we have to try to understand. Rabbi Shlomo Kluger asks a question on this medrash. He says, wait a minute, if a child is in a classroom and a child is asking an excellent question and the teacher tells him be silent or he's going to be punished, doesn't the child have a right to ask this question? So why is it, if you see a righteous person, a tzaddik that's suffering, why does Hashem respond that we don't have a right to ask? So Rabbi Kluger answers with a mashal, with a parable. There was once a master tailor who was known far and wide for his ability to create beautiful articles of clothing. And the king called him over to his kingdom, and he says, I hear of your talent, spreads out throughout the four corners of the earth. He says, I need to make a very magnificent coat. And I've gathered the most expensive materials known to man on planet Earth, and I want you to make me the most exquisite, expensive, most beautiful coat ever made. And the tailor said, okay, fine, I'll do my best. And the king gives him this very, very expensive material, and he spends weeks and weeks sewing and hemming and measuring and alterations and all these things. After a few weeks, he goes over to the palace and he presents this magnificent coat to the king, and the king looks at it. He's never seen something so beautiful before. It fits so perfectly, and the material is so luxurious. It looks aesthetically pleasing. He says he checked off all the boxes, and word got out of this amazing tailor and what he created for this king. And, when word comes out of a success of one person, people can get jealous. And people started getting jealous of this, of this tailor. So what happens when jealousy starts, being aroused? The people start making up a little bit of stories. And the tailor community starts saying, oh, you know what? He did a good job. Yeah, but he probably skimmed a little bit. This is really expensive material. Says the king gave him like 6 rolls. What did he do with the rest of it? And word got out that this tailor is a crooked tailor, and he gypped off the king, and he started taking material from the king. Now when the king heard this, the king started believing it. He says, wait a minute, maybe it's true. You know how things go. If someone starts talking, people, this is Lashon Hara. People can start believing it to some level. So the king calls him to his palace and said, is it true? He says, people are saying that you've stolen from me, that you've taken from my material. So this tailor goes over to the queen. Can I see the coat, please? And the king says, sure. He hands in the coat, and he starts taking out his scissors, and he starts cutting up this coat. And the king is looking at him, and he says, what are you doing? You're destroying my coat. And, he's sort of silencing, in a very respectful way, the king, and he's cutting and cutting. The king is looking at the most beautiful coat, and he lays out all the pieces of the coat. And he shows the king, he says, I want you to measure all the material. You will see here that not an inch is missing. Everything that I've taken is exactly in here. You thought that I stole from you because you saw things in layers. You didn't see under the cuff. You didn't see under the labels. There's so many different aspects of it. Now that I laid everything in front of you, I could prove my innocence and show you the authenticity that everything that you have given me is all in this coat. Explains Rav Shlomo Kluger. The response of HaKadosh Baruch Hu was not that he was dismissing the question. It wasn't that the question came and he says, you know what, I'm not answering it right now, and if you ask me again, I'm going to destroy the whole world. That in itself was the answer. It wasn't dismissing the question. It was the actual answer. Because HaKadosh Baruch Hu is saying, he says, you want to know why things are happening the way that they're happening? You want to know why they're going through so much suffering? I have to go through the beginning of time. I have to take the world, take it apart, and start again from the beginning, and then I could show you the reason why this person is suffering because of this thing that happened maybe who knows how many millennia ago, and this person is going through because of this. Everybody is going through something, and there's a reason for it. And that's what HaKadosh Baruch Hu was responding to the angels. He was responding to them. He says, if you keep on asking, if you ask me one more time, I'm going to return the world to emptiness. That was the answer. Then you're going to be able to see it. How many times did we go through suffering and we ask God, why? Why are you causing me this suffering? That's the question we shouldn't be asking. Because we don't want HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, oh, you want me to show you the answer? I could take you up into this world and show you all the answer. We don't want to hear that. And this is a lesson that we can learn, that if God forbid something happened, there's a reason for it. Yes, we're supposed to learn it. Yes, we're supposed to look into it. But we don't say, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, why did you do this to me? Or the famous words that a person should never say, that this is not fair, unfortunately. So when Rabbi Shmuel heard this from the angel, he heard this, he remained quiet. And the Caesar asked him, why is it that you are not crying until you reach the place of your tefillin? They asked Rabbi Shmuel. And he replied, I'm not crying for my soul, but I'm crying because of the mitzvah of tefillin that you're taking away from me. Up to now, I was being able to put on tefillin, but now you're ripping off the skin. Even though he was going to die, there was no way that he was going to be able to put on tefillin anymore. But still, he didn't have the ability to do it anymore, and for that he was crying. So the Caesar responded to him, do you still have faith in your God? And Rabbi Shmuel Kohen Gadol responded that even if you kill me, I will not lose my faith. Immediately, the soul of Rabbi Shmuel departed and left his body. And it's interesting because the brothers, they removed Yosef's coat. They removed him of his clothing. Rabbi Shmuel now was removed from his skin as an atonement for that. There is an interesting aspect to Rabbi Shmuel's also children. His son and his daughter were also very, very beautiful. They were taken into captivity. They were sold as servants by different Roman masters, and each of their masters once met each other, and they said they boasted about the beauty of their servants. So they decided to have the servant and the maidservant go and marry each other, and their children will be divided between the two masters, because each one was claiming that he had a beautiful servant, and the other one said, I have a beautiful maidservant. They said, perfect, we have a perfect idea, let's put them together, they'll have beautiful children, and we'll split it up, and this way we'll increase our revenue. So they place the servants and the maidservant, which is the son and daughter of Rabbi Shmuel Kohen Gadol, but they didn't know it because it was dark. And the servant sat in one corner, and he said to himself, "I am a Kohen, the son of a Kohen, the Kohen Gadol." He says, "I should marry a maidservant." And the maidservant sat in the other corner and said to herself, "I am also a Kohen, the daughter of a Kohen." It says, I should go marry a servant. So they each sat in their respective corners and they cried the whole night. When the morning came, they recognized each other and they fell on each other and they cried until their souls left them, which shows you the continuation of how the level of his children were on. But this begins to show you the reasoning and underlining a little bit of understanding of the 10 martyrs, the Asarah, Harugay, Malchut that we mourn on, and we don't mourn only on them, we also mourn on all the souls that we lost during the time of the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash. May the Beis Hamikdash be rebuilt speedily in our days, and may we be able, through Tchias HaMeisim, to rejoice together with the Asarah, Harugay, Malchut and all the rest of Klal Yisrael that were lost throughout the years.